Hi, I'm Saremy with So Liberated, and today I'm going to show you how to do a full bust adjustment or an FBA on a bodice that has a princess seam going to the shoulder. I'll be using the Ember Dress by So Liberated as my example. Some fitted bodices don't have darts and they have princess seams, and so today I'm going to show you how to do an FBA or a full bust adjustment on a bodice with a princess seam that goes to the shoulder. You'll be able to use this adjustment on most bodices that have a princess seam that goes to the shoulder. There are different kinds of bodices with different kinds of shaping. Some have darts, some have princess seams, and some have no shaping at all. For a darted bodice, we have a whole course on how to fit and sew a darted hinterland dress called Learn to Sew and Fit Bodices. You can also check out the free bodice fitting guide linked in the description if you want to try your hand at some adjustments for fitting your bodices. If you've ever made a bodice and it's fitting you nicely through the shoulders, but maybe you're seeing some strain lines pointing at your bust or your placket is gaping, maybe the side seams are kind of pulling forward, you might need a full bust adjustment. If you want to learn more about if you need one, you can download our free fitting guide for bodices, which is linked in the description. And if you're looking for an adjustment for a small bust adjustment, we have one of those too. You can find it linked in the description. My pattern pieces are half scale, so while they may look smaller and my seam allowances especially look smaller than yours, they are to scale to the pattern. We always work on the seam lines when we're making adjustments so that we can maintain accuracy and we don't change anything unintentionally. All right, for our full bust adjustment, we need both our side front and our center front, and we're going to draw lots of lines in prep, but you're also going to need your seam allowance lines, so you might want to add those now. All right, so I've added my seam allowance to the princess seam and the armhole here. Now, if you need help calculating how much you need to increase your bust circumference, you can use our fitting guide to do this math. So now we're going to draw 4 more lines, all right? The first one we're going to do is from this notch, which indicates the apex, to our armhole notch here. Now, this right here is going to be a hinge. So we're going to cut up to it on either side. We also need an angled line from this apex kind of down. Something like that. You're also going to need 2 horizontal cut lines, one of which I'm going to use the lengthen and shorten line right here, and I'm going to put it in the seam allowance right here. The other one needs to be above this line wherever you've put it. So I'm going to use this one right here that I drew in already above. So we need a line that goes up to our armhole notch from our apex notch. We need a line from the apex just angled down towards the side seam. We also need a cut line, and I'm using the lengthen and shorten line here in the seam allowance. And then we need one above that. All right, are you ready to get going? This is going to be a fun one. You need to know the amount that you want to increase your bust circumference. Whatever that number is, that total number, you're going to divide that in half since we're going to be doing it to 1/2 of the pattern. So let's say that we want to increase our bust circumference by 1 inch. We're going to divide that in half and use a 1/2 inch as our guide. So we're going to make our first cut and we're going to go from our waist through the apex and to that hinge that I drew on here already. I'm going to cut on the other side up to that point as well so I get my hinge. Next, I'm going to cut from the side seam to the apex. And we'll create a hinge there. It's okay if you cut through and you miss your hinge. You'll just have to be a little careful. So now we're going to spread this apart the amount that we want to change it. All right, now I'm going to get a piece of paper to slip under here. I'm going to secure the upper portion of my bodice here to the paper. Now we're going to pull this apart and we want to get a 1/2 inch distance between this line and this line here. So we're looking for a 1/2 inch between here. Since we're doing a 1 inch increase, we want to do that in half. And we're going to pull this section down so that these 2 lines are parallel to one another like this. So remember, I'm doing half scale, so 1/2 inch for me is going to look more like 1/4 inch, just like that. This is going to open up right here, and that's exactly what we want to see. We want this nice and parallel, and now I'm going to secure this lower section to my paper. All right, remember this little line that we drew in the seam allowance here? We're going to cut that completely through, and now we're going to pull this little piece of seam allowance straight down. so that it lines up with our waist seam right here. We don't want to increase this amount. We want to keep it nice and consistent all the way down. So you can always line up a ruler just like this and make sure that you're getting it perfectly in line. And now we'll secure that. Now we're going to draw a line from the tip of this line here through to that point there, just like this. And now we're going to make another hinge right here. We're going to cut right to this point and create a hinge. I'm going to have to cut through to here to release this so I can close this little section here, since my paper's there. And now we're going to swing this little triangle closed because we don't want a dart, right? Now, for some bust adjustments, you might get quite a gap here, and that's okay because we're going to true that up on the center front in just a second. So you're going to want to know that amount that it opened up right along the seam line. All right, so now our side front is pretty much complete. We're going to set it aside for a second. We're going to measure this amount that opened up right here along the seam line. And for me, this is a very small amount, but on a larger bust adjustment, you might see a bigger gap. So we'll measure that amount, and we're going to draw another line from this apex here straight across, just like this. We're going to cut right through, and we're going to use a piece of paper. Now, for some princess seam adjustments, if you aren't working on the ember, you're going to want to divide the amount that this seam changed between these two lines here. This amount that we lowered this to meet the waist here, you would want to do in this lower line. And this bust, you'd want to do up here on the bust. For the ember, we could probably do all of it in one place, but we're going to do it in both places just in case your pattern piece needs the adjustment in two places. So for this one here, I'm going to have two pieces of paper. I'm going to secure my upper center front to one of them. And then I'm going to line up my lower piece parallel to that edge, this distance here on the gap that I got, which is very tiny on mine here. So we would line it up just like that. And one way to make sure that you're directly one on top of the other is to use your ruler and make sure your grain line is still nice and straight. All right, so now I'm going to secure that just like that. And then for this gap right here that we created when we cut and lowered our seam allowance there, we're going to cut this other line that we created. Place our other piece of paper under there. I'll secure it to that one first. And then I'm going to measure this amount here. And if it's a significant amount, I will draw myself a line. I can line this up to that line. I make sure that it's directly one on top of the other with my ruler, just like this, making sure it's nice and straight. And then secure it. Okay, now lastly, we're just going to trim off all of our excess paper here. Make sure everything is secure over here. And you'll need a piece of paper underneath this amount that opened up. And now we'll trim this. And there we have our full bust adjustment there. You can see that we added our 1/2 inch for a 1 inch total circumference right here with this wedge. We've trued it up so that our seam is matching up to our waist seam. Our waist did increase in this change. So if you don't want your waist to increase on other types of princess seam bodices, you can true that up here at the side seam or bringing in the princess seam to match the old waistline. Our front matches our seam line still since we increased it here to match and here to match. All of your other seams are the same as they were, so none of your other pattern pieces need to get updated in relation to this except for your skirt. We've increased our waist circumference here at the bottom. Now, this is okay in some cases. You can leave it with your princess seam bodice. If you want to keep this additional waist amount for the Ember dress, you're going to need to increase the side front skirt panel to match this amount. Now, if you want to get the waist back to where it was, we can do this one of two ways. We can do our trusty slash and overlap method by going right up here to this apex here and creating a hinge and pulling it over so that the waist seam is back to the same size right here. So you've created more of a rounded bust shape here along the princess seam. Or we can do it right here at the side seam by drawing in our side seam amount here and doing the exact same thing I just showed you there, but our hinge is up here at the armhole. So we would slice up the side seam here, stop at the seam, hinge on the other side. It's always important to work on the seam line so we don't change these seam lengths. And then we would measure this amount that we altered our bust and pull it over the same amount. And you're measuring along the waist seam line here. So I would mark that amount that I added right here, pull my seam allowance over until it touches that line and secure. This way our side seam hasn't changed length and will still match our side back. And now our waist seam would match the side front skirt. All right, there you go. There's your full bust adjustment. And let's check out the difference. So here is our original front. We have some additional length here. That's great for over the bust. And then here is our original. And you can see we've added some additional bust here and down here at the bottom for some additional bust length as well. All right, good luck making all of your bust adjustments for your princess seam bodices and sewing your Ember dress. Thanks for watching.